Your Views, My Facts, begins in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Thomas John back with Views and Facts. Glad everybody is here with us and listening. We've got a great episode today. We're going to be speaking about, I'll just say, the lasting legacies of Ronald Reagan and some of the things that he has that he did in his presidency that are still with us today. Potentially maybe some criticisms that people have said that we're going to address. So real quick, as always, or frequently, maybe I should put, I've got one of our Vipers in here, and I'll say the Den. That's been a name that has been thrown out there for the name of this podcast studio, which I think is fitting because snakes live in dens. Yeah, it's pretty good. So there you heard it. Everybody should know that voice. That is the one and only Viper Rich.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
I would respond to that, but I'm not one of the guys. I'm the host.
That's true.
I'm the king.
Debatable. In America, I don't think we have titles.
But you would love for us all to have titles.
No. I would actually not support monarchy titles.
Well, I thought, yeah, but then don't you want us all to have the little, shields with our banners on them, the shizzles or
You're like coat of arms?
Yeah, but whatever their bullshit's called.
Oh, yeah. No, I just think it's cool that you can pass down your lineage and it's like tracked through a coat of arms, and each particular item on the coat's interesting.
I pass down my lineage in other ways.
I'm sure.
Vegas knows about it.
There's probably one or two out there.
6 or 7. Who's counting?
You know what? Someone will cover it.
All right. So before I begin, let's go ahead and do our regular spiel. Rich, if they wanted to find us, how can they find us?
You can go on Facebook or Twitter. You can go at Views and Facts. Obviously, the podcast is Your Views, My Facts.
Right.
We're now on YouTube.
Yes, we are.
And so we've gotten a lot of complaints about not being accessible at work, especially on government computers. So now if you want to hear us say fuck or whatever we're going to say next, you can listen to us on YouTube and hear your boss bitch about it.
Right, which should not be a problem, because some of the radio stations they listen to while they're working, right, can be just as vulgar. And so what difference does it make if there is fuck only being said once an hour or 15 times an hour like we do?
Yeah, we don't use it in a terrible way either. It's almost like to amplify our statements.
Correct. And the FCC does not control this podcast. So
Nope.
You can say what you want. And if anybody has a problem with that in your workspace, just say you're an adult, so grow some balls. And B, if you're part of the government, specifically part of the military, your job is to go kill people, win nations' wars, defend our country. So if you're okay with killing somebody, which you all better be, if not, get the fuck out. But if you're okay with that, then you should not hate the word fuck.
The beauty is most of our bosses, I think, also listen to this and enjoy this podcast, so it's all right.
Yeah, you got to cherish that word. It's just, it can be used in so many different facets, which is why I love it. It's versatile. That's a word that versatility may be a key to air power.
I've been told that as well, or it might be CBTs. If you're not military, you may not know what we're talking about.
Yeah, we'll just say that's computer-based training, so you can only, I'm sure, assume how dreadful that bullshit is. But hey, Rich, look, man, I wanted to read you a comment that was directed towards you. That way, in the case that you wanted to give any rebuttal back or maybe a thanks, you can. But so on Podbean, which is one of the apps that you can download on CastBox or iTunes or whatever, right? Just go online and to the iTunes store, to the Android Google Play store to download our podcast. But on the Podbean one, Proud Air Force Brat stated this in regards to the one-on-one interview that we recently did. So I quote, "Great conversation. Maybe a Views and Facts newsletter in the future with a column for Rich to share his knowledge about civics, politics, history with us. History isn't her forte, so it's amazing every time that you cite the exact year something occurred. Is anyone else baffled? Views and Facts rocks."
Well, I appreciate all the love, and I do think this podcast rocks. This is one of the few podcasts where the voice of the people is actually in full effect. You know what I mean? This is sort of revolutionary because
completely
Thomas actually reaches out to people, and those that say they want to be heard actually are given the opportunity. They may not always take the opportunity, but he'll welcome anybody in the booth or in the den. In the den,
yeah, I will extend out my hand, and you can walk with me in hell.
Yeah, I mean, you make it very appealing.
That is a song lyric from a Lamb of God song.
Ah,
guess what the song's called?
Walk with me in hell.
God, you're so good. See, this is why a newsletter probably should be made for you, man. So good. And I did not set him up for that, everybody. He probably has never listened to Lamb of God except when it's been at some random time in my vehicle.
That's true.
And he probably still didn't even know that he was listening to it, but it's such a great song.
It was, yeah, I knew it was either somewhere around that or maybe Insane Clown Posse, I think was the other one we listened to often.
Yeah. Forget them. They
Oh, you don't like them anymore?
No.
But yeah, thanks for the love. I appreciate it. Hopefully I'll be on more of these. And as I sip this Cabernet that TJ so graciously poured, you know.
Robert Mondavi.
You do love that place.
It's a good one.
Look, what's your favorite one they make?
Moscato d'Oro, which should be Fruit of the Eye, if I'm not mistaken on what that stands for. And look, I was turned on to that by my dad when he came out to visit when I was down at Travis, which is in the, I'll say, Fairfield, Vacaville area, that we went down into Napa Valley to go visit some of the wineries. And he had mentioned, like, oh, I wonder if I can go find this wine, that I remember tasting back in 1991, 92, 93. Now, mind you, when he came out to visit, this was 2006, 2007. So we're talking 14 years ago, where he's trying to recollect this wine that he had tasted. I didn't think much about it at the time, but it sticks with me now because we obviously ended up finding it. So we went to one winery, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and we weren't really doing too much drinking per se. It was more just exploring and taking in the sights because my parents aren't heavy drinkers at all. So
the good Christians that they are.
I don't know if I'd go that far. My mom probably. My dad maybe not so much.
Government worker for sure.
Right. So, look, I've got some stories about the church where I told one of my pastors to go fuck off. So we can get into that some other time, but that's a good story. As well as when another pastor, when my grandfather died, he did not allow the American flag to be draped over my grandfather's coffin.
Oh, that's just unacceptable.
Right. So I'm sure people are going to want to hear about that, and we will get into that on another podcast because that really pisses me off. But I digress. So there we were, Napa Valley. We finally made our way to this winery called the Robert Mondavi Winery. We went in there. Boom, my dad asked for this wine, which was the Moscato. Had it. He goes, that's it. I've been looking for this thing for 14 years. And so from then on, I said, this is pretty good. So now I just primarily stick with Robert Mondavi.
Do you ever take some of it back home when you drive to Iowa?
I don't even have to. What my dad then found out, once he figured out what it was, he can go to some of the local stores out there and they'll order it for him.
Oh, that's a good deal. It's good capitalism.
Yeah, correct. Capitalism. The only way that the world should live in.
I mean, any other way has actually been proven to not work.
Any other way is communism. I was trying to make a pun there, a joke.
There was. I see what you did there. But it does bring up on the Facebook app that Views and Facts has. You and I are often on the app, and we try to get more people involved.
Yeah,
but
leave us a fucking review, and I might just read it off like we just did.
Yeah, or come at us with a comment.
Anything.
We take everything but dick pics.
That's true.
Send those straight to TJ because they will be removed off Facebook.
Some of the Vipettes. I don't even know if that's what a female snake is called.
We can call them Vipettes.
Some of the Vipettes might want some of those.
Yeah, I could think of one or two probably.
Some of them might. I'm not going to screen them beforehand, though. I'm not going to... So we're going to need to find...
The right-looking one?
No, we're going to need to find somebody else to screen these pictures. Before I even get...
Hey, Sean Crane comes back pretty soon. We can have him
true.
do it.
That's true. Sean, when you finally get around to this one, you are going to be our screener for all things imagery. So... Congratulations. It might be a bump in pay, as in one extra beer for the evening.
That's a good deal.
When you're in the podcast.
But
I'm sorry, when you're in the den.
In the den, yeah, we really got to get
In
used
the
to
den.
saying that.
The den.
The den.
Boom.
So check this out. Posted yesterday on the Views and Facts page.
Let's hear it.
It was a Ben Shapiro post that was shared. It says basically...
Ben Shapiro, by the way, is a, I'll say conservative.
Yep. Oh, yeah, for sure. Jewish.
Well, I didn't want to say right wing.
So Jewish conservative.
Yep.
News podcast orator. So his daily is podcasting on his Daily Wire.
Yep.
That's the name of his podcast, or the Ben Shapiro Show. And then he actually also goes to speak against state legislatures, or he also goes to campuses, and he basically will allow, let's just say, left-wing students to ask him questions, and he will then counter their questions using basic logic that works within the American Constitution.
Oh, right. He is a very powerful communicator, very, very great speaker.
Harvard grad,
and
law school.
Yes, he uses language that is plain, simple, everybody can understand. Right, cites the sources. Very, very, very great, very amazing. If you have not listened to any of these podcasts, listen to a few of them. If you're not even sure about going down that road, just YouTube Ben Shapiro. Phenomenal. And he is, even though we said conservative, he is fair about making sure that the criticism is even.
Yeah, he's a never Trumper actually. So for him, he'll say when Trump does something good. He'll also say when Trump does something stupid or bad.
Right.
So it's fair.
Yeah. All right. So got it. That's who Ben Shapiro is.
So basically, he just cites Ben Shapiro in this post cites a poll saying half the millennials currently in college would rather live under socialism or communism rather than the current capitalism that's in like America or just the Western world. And then Ben Shapiro says, "Oh, thanks, leftist professors. We do have a student, or not a student. We do have a listener." Trevor Hoagland used to work with us, great dude. He says, "I think the rise in the desire for communism speaks to huge discontent with the value of money that capitalism places over any large-scale society improvements." So what do you think of that statement? Obviously the post is about communism and socialism versus capitalism from a professor's teaching the students, or just overall the students.
Right, sure. So
perspective.
So I obviously I want to be respectful to our listener. Right now, I don't want to alienate anybody, but of course, nothing's off limits here. Right, so I want to make sure that I'm going to be truthful in what I say.
Well, he's not a pansy. Trevor can take anything you want to say.
All right, fair enough. So I think the comment is asinine. You won't look. Capitalism has proved that is how you are going to have innovations and to start any economy in any country on the path to greatness, right? And this is somewhat fitting, and I know we'll get into this later, but with one of Reagan's legacies, right, is that when you end up lowering taxes, removing government regulations from small businesses or from companies, that then gives them the capital to pursue as entrepreneurs, to start new ventures and to make new products, to make new jobs, such as the phone that you just fucking used to read that comment. So I don't know why anybody would want to say, right, that we have devalued our dollar based, because of capitalism.
Yeah, for him, I think he's looking at, when he says societal improvements, I assume he's talking about infrastructure. He's talking about just different things that the public uses.
Okay.
And so obviously from a socialist communist perspective, they believe their government's job is to do the public good, right?
Right. So I know you are biting at the grip to probably respond to this comment as well. But the irony that I see in that, though, and we're going to talk about infrastructure and so forth. The funny part about it is that if you let capitalism again thrive, things will get better, things will improve, infrastructure, right? Your jobs, the marketplace, and my case in point would be that the exact opposite of that, which is what's currently going on, when you have too much government regulation, you end up becoming more of, I'll use this term loosely, and you can maybe give me a better one, but like an oligarchy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have the government running, saying, let's take the oil industry. So they are going to constrict and say that, well, we're going to put this much money towards fossil fuels, and then put taxes upon that, where these taxes need to go towards potentially improving our roads, but they don't do that. So you want to say that capitalism is the problem? It ain't capitalism. It's the government. The government's a problem. The same government that you want to run everything about you.
I think you're absolutely correct. So, I mean, we can look at it from the perspective of California, for instance. California has a huge economy and they have a lot of money coming in. So you have a lot of these people, regardless of left or right, saying how large the economy is in California and why it could support itself. The problem is nobody actually looks at government expenditures in California. And so what ends up happening is even though California brings in massive amounts of money, there's so much that's currently being spent and unfunded as well that it shows the inefficiency that is government. So when the people rely on government to do the public good or to provide things that citizens want, what the problem is you're actually relying on an entity that is completely not efficient, right? You have an inefficient, large government, and what will end up happening is the idea is that government employees and people that work for the government want to maintain their status and they would like to grow their power and they want more funding. So that it means increasing the budget. So in California, you have additional agencies popping up because the government's like, hey, we want to provide this, we want to provide that, we want to do this for the citizens. And the answer is to tax the corporate companies, the small businesses, and the middle class. And they say that they're taxing the upper class, but really if you look at California really taxes middle and upper class about the same. So you've now taken money that would normally be spent in your economy and you're then spending it where you choose to. But the problem is over the last 15 years, California's chosen not to put back into the system the way they said they would. So they've taxed oil, they've taxed other entities, and instead of fixing the roads, putting new infrastructure in the way they said they would, they've actually spent it on repaying their debts or putting it in what they call the general fund.
Yeah.
And the problem is that money in the general fund allows the politicians to do what they want with it, right? Like they're able to put it towards any project they want to hopefully sway voters to continue voting for them. And the problem with that is now you have like the SB1 bill in California, which is the gas tax bill, and now Californians pay 12 cents more per gallon than they already were paying, and diesel is 20 cents more per gallon. So California was already the third most expensive state in gas tax, and now it's at number one, right? So you pay like the
Awesome.
the average Californian pays about 70 cents more per gallon than most other states, the average state. And like New York is number two, but it's like pretty close. Like I mean it's pretty close, but you have to understand there are less drivers in New York than there are in California because, New York's it's a smaller state to begin with, and everybody's subways or transits everywhere. But California doesn't have a system like that. So really, the middle class worker, the person that owns a farm, the person that owns a cattle industry, they now have to pay so much more in fuel that they're going to have to raise the cost on consumers. So really, like if you allow capitalism to flourish and you deregulate it, you will have hiccups from time to time, but the market works itself out. While if the government chooses to stranglehold the economy, what ends up happening is it creates inflation, it actually devalues your currency, and what ends up happening is the economy doesn't have as much money going into it.
No, very well put. Look, I agree with all that. Look, when you don't know the true forms or the history behind each of your types of government, then it's real easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, capitalism sucks and it's only for those that are the top 5% of our citizens. And I argue that, well, there's also nowhere else that you can go that you can also become that 5%. Figure out what the next big breakthrough is and go make it.
And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the Reagan legacy. So I don't want to get too far into that rabbit hole. But I guess the last closing remark on this subject. I don't think Trevor is saying that he supports communism or socialism by any means. And I don't know. Actually, when he worked with us, he never said any political thoughts. And so I could try to take a stab of where he stands within the scale, but
he could be just taking a cattle prod.
Yeah.
I mean, it getting us going.
Which I'm not opposed to that, right?
That's what we want.
I think what Trevor's saying is he's trying to justify why the students feel this way. But I guess my counter would be, I think the students are stupid. And if you go back,
Sure, simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, and if you go back to my the education episode that we did, I told you there's a difference between getting an education and getting a degree.
You mean forget theater?
Forget
Forget theater. Get an education, bitch.
So the problem is you do have liberal professors teaching them that a social democracy works, or like, hey, like doing the common good and allowing yourself to be taxed at a higher rate is better for people, and that's what people are being told. The problem is also these students may feel disenfranchised with capitalism, but it's because they have student loans and they have not started their careers yet. And the beauty of capitalism is when you actually start a real career, you really start to like free market capitalism real fast, right? Because once you start actually seeing what's being taken out of your money tax-wise, and then you look around the city and you're like, shit, this money's being spent like uselessly. You're like, dude, I don't support taxation. Like, it doesn't take long. Like my professor that I take most of my classes with, he was a civil rights protester in the 1960s and 70s, Vietnam vet, very disenfranchised with the government at the time, hated LBJ, hated Richard Nixon. As soon as he got his master's degree and started actually working at different firms and like managing money for law firms, he's like, oh shit, like he actually started leaning to the right and started supporting capitalism, because he's like, oh, I clearly see now that the government is ineffective in all means, and that good intentions do not always mean good outcomes.
Yeah. You know, and I would, oh, excuse me. I would maybe say this as well, is that give me a show that's currently being aired on television, because this is the way that we work, right? Like, what's pop culture? What are we doing? Do we have a communism show out there? Do we have a socialist show out there? No, but we do have a show called Shark Tank, which is all about entrepreneurs and capitalism and going after that dollar. So clearly there must be something about it, because there's an entire show devoted to it, well, where billions are giving their money. Oh, and by the way, one of those individuals is Mark Cuban, who a lot of the leftists do love, which I think he's got a lot of good points as well.
No, he does.
He is slowly. And this will be my last comment. Then we can move on. But he has slowly in the last, I'll say, 18 months, started shaping his views to be more, I'll say, right leaning, because he's been on Fox News a lot more. And so I'm curious as to if he is trying to potentially ever make a push towards running for any office, and he's trying to build that base. I don't know. It's crazy.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, you know, he's been on and he's definitely sounded like a centrist for the most part.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, he's opposed Trump where he needs to, so he's gotten some political capital there from people that dislike Trump.
Right.
And then going on Fox News and just talking free markets. Anybody on the right is going to enjoy somebody that talks free market capitalism, regardless of where they stand. So I'm not opposed to Mark Cuban. I think the beauty of people that are, I won't say all Republicans, but I think anybody that supports free markets, and normally if you're more conservative leaning, you're willing to listen to both sides, regardless of what people want to say. And really what it comes down to is, I think most conservatives have a function of reasoning that most liberals don't, and even the most educated liberals don't, because they really do have like this compassion, emotional factor that trumps what we would consider rational.
Yeah. All right. Look, there you have it. All right. We've been going on for 24 minutes just off of one comment and one question that have been asked on Facebook. So get on there at Views and Facts. Leave us a review, leave us a comment. We read them all. We didn't just handpick any of these. Look, we could have gone into, some of our viewers want us to talk about ethanol and gas taxes, aliens and conspiracies, the FCC and how corrupt they are.
Yeah, the Uranium One deal.
Uranium One deal. So we read them all, and we know that they're out there. So believe us, we are not cherry picking what we're reading. We see your stuff. So continue listening, leaving us reviews, comments, what you want to hear about, and we will develop the episodes around them. So,
and shout out to Trevor too. Haven't seen you in a while, but we all hope you're doing well.
Yeah, brother. Exactly.
And a shout out to Jeremy Breedlove, just became a Republican.
No shit.
Yeah, he just told me last week he registered for the GOP. I asked him why, and he's like, well, California's taxing me a lot, man. and I'll tell you this: I gave him an economics book a while back. It's called New Theories from Dead Economists, and it sort of wraps around like why we have now leaned towards a free market, liberal market economy. And I think Jeremy really liked it. So
yeah, he's a smart character. Look, all it takes from anybody, right? And it's the same thing for me. Look, if you have something for me or for Rich that you want us to read or investigate that maybe will be on the left, give it to us. We'll read it. Maybe it will open our eyes. Maybe we'll learn something new. But it's the same thing, right? Giving out information to, right, people that are so dead set. You have to be willing to walk through the door, though, right?
Of course.
And if you walk through the door and you can walk back out, being the same person you are, more power to you, right? God bless you, move on, or whoever you believe in. But you may realize that maybe something is a little bit wrong. Maybe.
Yeah, and
So-
in some cases, I mean, the beauty of the polar opposition is we can come up with comprehensive legislation or comprehensive solutions to things. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't always have to be a left and right spectrum.
Yeah.
But right now, I think on the left, it's so hard to get them to even come to the table.
Oh, correct. They are. That's because their focus is on impeachment and banning guns. Let's not worry about the truck that was just used to murder people. Another podcast. Ronald Reagan, his legacy, his presidency. He was the great communicator. We have referenced him before on this podcast. We obviously want to dedicate some 25 minutes or so, right, time to speak about him. This is somebody that I have, I'll say, looked up to through mostly readings. While I was, quote unquote, alive while he was president, I wasn't necessarily coherent in what was going on. And then likewise with Rich as well. And of course, with our comment, you know that he's, I'd say, a steward of the civil and politics movement. So he's very familiar with Ronald Reagan. So, Rich, my Viper, let's get into a website that I stumbled upon.
Okay, what website?
It's called cracked.com. Look, I'm not familiar with it.
It's a pretty leftist website, but sure, let's go.
Yeah, so I this is one of the things in regards to the research, right, for the show that we try to do, and figuring out things that we can.
We really need the Viperettes to start doing some work around here.
That's true, right? I mean, women say they want an equal place, so here we are as the men doing all the work. So come on, women, if you want your fair share and you want to be making that, 99 cents to our 99 cents, you got to start doing some work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, that's why you're at where you're at.
I believe Britney Spears says you got to work, bitch.
Exactly.
I didn't say it. Britney said it.
Correct. Yeah. And anything Britney says is true.
Yeah, because she's Britney, bitch.
Yeah. All right. So this article was entitled 6 Ways That You Didn't Realize Ronald Reagan Ruined the Country.
Oh,
You're going to enjoy this one.
I'm sure.
I'm sure you are. And I will look forward to being able to inject when I can on some of the rebuttals of the lasting legacies that Reagan has done. But fuck it. So let's go right into it, man. All right. So the very first one, and by first I mean this is number 6 on the list.
Okay.
So they say that his administration was the most corrupt ever, and that 138 members of his team were investigated, indicted, or convicted for their roles in various scandals. What they're trying to get into then is obviously, if I'm sure his people are corrupt, he was probably corrupt, obviously, as his administration. How would you respond?
Well, I'm not saying this is the right answer, but Reagan was not a micromanager by any means. Baker is his chief of staff during the 8 years, and what Baker did is he ended up putting people of polar opposition as far as how they would conduct themselves in his office together, and so his cabinet and his chief and basically his staff, they had different visions on things, and they would compete to see whose vision would make it up to the agenda, right? Like who would be on Reagan's agenda, and so oftentimes like. Reagan was quoted saying, "Hey, I got us here. I'm elected. I have a role to play, just like I have in any other movie. Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, you guys have roles to play, and what I expect from you guys is to give me the details on what I need to know and filter out anything that I don't need to know." And really what he did is he empowered those below him, who are honestly, like in all factors, presidents are never as qualified as their staff. So he empowered those that are more educated to do what they needed to do. Now, the problem with this cracked number 6 saying it's the most corrupt administration, they use those terms to describe any administration. If this article was about George W. Bush, they would say the same thing. You know what I mean? It would be the exact same thing. If it was about George H. Bush, it would be the exact same thing.
Right.
So, like, when they quote these numbers about how many people were investigated or indicted, I mean, this from what level to what level? And I don't believe in the article because I have read it. I do not believe in the article they completely specify all 138. They do highlight the Iran-Contra. Which is clearly an important one for us, right? But it does what we now know today is the CIA definitely worked. The CIA did a lot of work as well as the military, where they were authorized at some level to conduct themselves as they saw fit. So I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think Reagan was completely privy to it all. But I mean, you have to understand, like, the CIA literally worked independent from the JFK administration. You know, like, I mean, in every administration, what you have is you have some corruption, and it doesn't mean that it leads to the executive level, right? Like, nothing shows that it leads to the executive level.
No, true, but I would also, if I could jump in here, that when we're talking about certain treaties or deals that are going on, right, you also have to be aware of, because as you read the article, what they try to say is that, well, we had an arms embargo in place with Iran that wasn't supposed to happen. Right, we were using that money to help topple a socialist government then. And, you know, as they say, right, history will always be the one that can kind of show what things we're doing where.
Oh, yeah,
but when we have what's called clandestine operations, which is where, right, like, we are never there to exist, right, and if you ever get caught, right, the government will just disavow you. So, for instance, right, the Bin Laden, obviously, raid was a clandestine operation. It obviously, luckily, went well, and we got him. But I guess why I bring that up is that, yes, you can go in and cherry pick then, saying that, well, the Iran-Contra deal was bad, right? There was a scandal, it shouldn't have happened. But there are hidden reasons behind why things were put in place, right? Such as using those funds to go topple a socialist country.
Yeah.
And then there are secret, top secret, classified operations that are happening.
So, like, yeah, I completely agree. So history chooses who's a winner or loser, right? And in this case, granted, I don't know if the ends justify the means, but one could argue that the actions that Reagan's administration allowed to happen was in the end a benefit for the Contras, really. You know, Reagan did wear a shirt saying "I am a Contra" back when he was running for the '84 election, and I think the big thing to know, I guess, is the fact that he, like you said, he's toppling a socialist government. People have to understand that we did have a fear that allowing socialism and communism into the Western Hemisphere would leave us vulnerable. I mean, you have the Cuban Missile Crisis in 63, where literally we assumed that we're going to be...
That was JFK, though.
Yeah, that was JFK. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
But, we had a fear that having missiles and having a communist regime in the Western Hemisphere would be a huge issue. It
would have been horrible.
Yeah, exactly. So it's no different here. And what ended up happening is Reagan's administration supporting the Contras eventually led to social and political reform there. You know what I mean? So it ended up paying off in the end. I'm not saying it justified the means, but I would say Reagan ended up winning historically there.
Fact. Okay. Good way to somewhat counter their argument on number 6. So their number 5, Reaganomics, right, is still destroying us or has destroyed us.
So in that article, I believe they actually talk about the fact that the 1% or whatever percentage you want to say, those that have a lot more than those that don't. And they talk about how under Reagan, the rich became richer and the poor became poorer. But unfortunately, I guess fortunately for us and unfortunately for those that don't like Reagan, Reaganomics actually did work.
Correct.
What people have to understand is, for one, we were actually seeing hyperinflation as far as our actual currency. We had what was called stagnation with our economy, which meant the GDP was at a near non-growth, almost a 0 percentile when he came into office.
Right.
And we were seeing a fuel crisis where the Middle East wasn't going to supply us, nor was Russia, because they were clearly enemies of ours.
Oh, right. And he came in though, right? So this is Nixon, Ford, Carter.
I mean, scandalous time period.
Correct. Yeah. It was at a time when things were bad, right? I mean, we were getting out of the Vietnam war area, Cambodia. We had like turned over the Panama Canal during that time, right?
Yeah, Carter
shit
gave up
was
the Panama Canal.
shit was bad. So, and I'm going to let you continue on here in a minute, but I just wanted to jump in that there was so much power that had already been given to the government then before he had stepped in, right? That his job was to give it back to the states the way that federalism per se was supposed to work. So, anywho, continue on. Reaganomics doesn't work. I'm sure you're going to make my point here.
No. You're absolutely right. So, I want to hold off on talking about the alignment or the realignment America had under Reagan because I'd like to specify that when we're not answering the questions from this article.
Okay.
So I'm not going to go in depth on that. But what I'll say is this: when he stepped in, it wasn't Reagan's idea as far as what we stepped into as far as using the Federal Reserve to reduce currency and to raise interest rates, but Reagan bought into it because he knew we needed to stop the hyperinflation. So like Reagan right away worked with the Federal Reserve. They agreed that no legislation would be passed using Keynesian economics to try to spur economic growth, but instead we would raise interest rates on homes, loans, etc. And the Federal Reserve would continue to destroy currency in order to basically stop the inflation. And inflation got to 13.5%, which is like an all-time high in America. And under Reagan, we were able to get inflation down to like 3%. And a healthy economy runs between 1.5% up to 4%. 4% being a little bit high on the inflation rate, but we were at 13.5%. Like we were literally on the verge of what's called runaway inflation. And without Reagan coming in with his policies, we probably would have saw the economy fall into a depression. But Reaganomics, as far as cutting taxes on corporate and the middle class and limiting the size of government by cutting spending was absolutely essential to give us the boom that we needed in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's funny because you see in 81, 82, you do see a really high unemployment, but by the end of 82 going into 1983, actually America's on a huge upswing. And by 1984, 85, there were people buying homes. You actually see like the credit card industry, which we could talk about the good or bad of that today, but the credit card industry now is at a boom. People have credit. We've reestablished credit in America, and people are spending money. The economy is fucking booming under Reagan, and really the Reaganomics that the Reaganomics of the 80s gave way to the 90s, and the big internet 90s boom under Clinton really is something we should thank Reagan for, because it's not Clinton policies that allowed us to flourish and get to the technological point to have the internet and have the explosion that we had. It is Reaganomics that provided that. And the last point on this is when they say that more people that have money now and that there's a bigger disparity, what they don't realize is when you talk poverty line in America with free markets or LME, liberal market cap economics, you end up having the poverty rate. Yeah, granted, more people may be making less, but the beauty is like everything's expanded upward. So what is considered poverty changes, right? Like look at America today, right? America today, poverty is considered you renting property, you having a big screen TV, and you having food on the table every day. While poverty in Mexico is literally you may not eat for 3 days.
Correct.
Right.
Oh yeah, completely agree. And with that point, right, of what you're saying about making things, if you don't like it. If you don't like the 1%, or you do not like the quote-unquote Reaganomics, where we had mentioned earlier, right, of taking away the regulations from the businesses, lowering tax structures for corporations and so forth, then don't go buy your iPhone. Yeah. Just stay away from the things that entrepreneurs made. So research everything and say, I don't want it because that was made under capitalism.
I mean, most people that support Reaganomics, like Milton Friedman, Hayek, who literally Reagan and Margaret Thatcher learned from, which was Hayek, they would say that we did not go all the way towards Reaganomics and that we needed to. So, like, in order to get rid of the disparity between the have and have-nots, we actually needed complete deregulation. But unfortunately, because of the way our economy is set up and the fact that we do have both left and right politicians, it's not like Reagan could pass every piece of legislation he wanted agenda-wise.
Right. All right. So yeah, no worries. So let's go to number 4 here. His stance on labor unions destroyed the middle class. And again, this is 6 ways that you didn't realize that Ronald Reagan destroyed us.
So that's idiotic. We'll talk more about the alignment, so I'm not going to go into detail again.
Okay.
But what I'll say is this: in 1980 through 88, actually, labor unions were at an all-time low in participation. Labor unions became a big thing in the 1930s under the New Deal, under FDR, and they really skyrocketed in the 1960s. But by the end of the 1970s, labor unions had basically like really fallen flat. Just because most people didn't believe that the unions had the power they needed to in order to persuade wages or job growth, right, in any sort of means. And so when Reagan stepped in, participation in labor unions in America was roughly around 33%, which was far lower than it had been like a previous decade. Like a decade prior, it was at roughly around 58, 59%. So labor unions were already like not being used as much. And to be honest with you, you cannot run a free market capitalist society or use the Reaganomics doctrine and have labor unions having massive strength. Labor unions actually get in the way of capitalism flourishing because you have a powerful entity that will sway and change the market instead of letting the market just operate on its own.
Right. Okay. Number 3. And again, this is from crack.com. He ignored the He ignored the AIDS epidemic for years.
So in the 1980s, there was still a lot of questions about AIDS. And I'm not saying that it was correct to ignore, but no one really understood at the time how the virus was, how it came
Correct.
to be. There were a lot of myths about the virus itself as far as it only attacking gays. But regardless of that, okay, we can talk about like how the government should spend more money or do more studies, and I guess that would be the bleeding heart for somebody to say so. But in the same sense, like most people that are getting AIDS are getting it from either being promiscuous, having sex unprotected. Like
Right.
theoretically, like if you and your spouse didn't have AIDS prior and you guys hadn't committed like some form of adultery or you guys hadn't shared some sort of blood needle swapping, you wouldn't get AIDS,
Correct.
right? So like Reagan, who supported like traditional families and like overall like morality here in America, I mean, granted, I'm sure he doesn't want people to have AIDS, but to me, it does not seem like the government's job to fix every single epidemic that may occur. You know, like Reagan supported privatization, which means he probably assumed that the private industry, like the medical industry, would do what it needed to aid against the AIDS virus.
Right.
Like I'm not sure when it became like the government's job to.
Well, and here's what I find. You know, when something when you have something that I'll say in this case AIDS, right, attacks a certain class of people, and yes, traditionally, right, it's going to be the very most promiscuous of people or homosexuals, right? And I'm just throwing out a fact here. I ain't trying to say anything about homosexuals.
Yeah, you're not targeting anybody. You're just
Correct.
saying facts.
So they want it. So, anyways, you then get the left side of the spectrum that wants to jump in and say, well, why isn't anything being done? Well, if I'm not mistaken, right, in the last decade, 2 decades, right, we've been going through this shift of people wanting to become. I don't recall the term, but right, not wanting to actually get inoculated, right, and getting shots. They're like, oh no, right, like I want to stay away from those government injections, right, and like heaven forbid, like we give you a shot to clear polio. Anyways, the only place that I'm going with this is that so I feel like. This example from this website is saying that they wanted them to go after, right, like that kind of sect of people for the AIDS virus, but go get your shots, right? And not saying that there's a shot for AIDS, but go get yourself cured, make sure that, or get your preventative shots, because I just remember watching on the news then just recently, and this is earlier in this week, is that now the monkey virus, or I'm sorry, monkeypox, is around now, which is being spread throughout Africa, and the Black Plague is back.
Well, the Black Plague in civil society is all but like we have medication now to give people. So like,
but it's back.
I'm sure it is. I mean, it's never disappeared. Like the bubonic plague actually has like 20 cases a year in America, right? So there are places, normally in the Southwest, actually, that carry them.
But they said even in our first world country, though, that there could be right. So the range is a 2 to 10% fatality rate,
which is pretty low.
I'm not saying it's not.
I mean,
low,
I think the flu has a higher mortality rate than the Black Plague does in America.
The point being is, like, I'm just saying, why is it AIDS, right? I mean,
one could argue Reagan did target the AIDS by having the war on drugs.
Oh, you probably could, but my point is,
no, I'm saying in a positive, right?
Correct. Yes. We'd have to go in though. Right, this would have required me. See, as we start doing this podcast, my brain starts even going more and more. It's that now I'd want to do the research on, well, did he go after anything else to try to stop something happening? Because this is why it's just picking off one thing, and that's why now you say, the war on drugs. And look, we can argue good or bad, right? The whole marijuana, yada, whatever, right? I mean, in the big picture of things, I would probably say that the war on drugs has been a failure.
Yeah, agreed.
But
not started under Reagan, though. It started under Nixon, technically.
Yeah. But anywho, it's just saying, like, if you're going to pick, if there happen to be 10 other epidemics that were going on that he took care of, and this is the one that he didn't, that's what I need to go research so I can ensure that what they're saying is a fair point. But,
I mean, real quick, just to add to it, though, what I'm saying is a lot of AIDS were actually spread through using needles for a lot of people that did drugs. So, like, now we're saying the government's supposed to try to fight AIDS, but, like, really, like, how are you getting AIDS? You're being promiscuous, so you're using your own choice. You're not just catching it in the air.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Or you're sharing a fucking needle. So in a way, a war on drugs is also knocking down the number of AIDS. You know, like, hey, you shouldn't be injecting yourself with something.
I love the logic, man.
I know. I mean, it just makes sense.
Number 2, the Reagan Doctrine made the Middle East what it is today.
Well, that's idiotic at best.
At best.
So, for one, the Afghanistan stuff actually fell under Jimmy Carter. So, correct, you may want to look at your dates. But Russia had swooped into Afghanistan in 1979.
Yeah.
While Carter was also dealing with his failures in Iran. So Carter failed to keep the Shahs in Iran, right? And he actually, Carter's administration itself focused on not civil rights, but human rights and being an activist for human rights. And he was calling out the Shahs for obviously not being the most moral when it came to how they treated people that disagreed with them. And regardless, you have a huge movement to overthrow the Shahs in Iran, but that started under Carter. So Iran having issues with America started under Jimmy Carter, a Democrat. Afghanistan started under Jimmy Carter, a Democrat. One could say actually Reagan's policies of arming the Taliban at the time actually pushed Russia out, who was our primary enemy, right? Like, granted, the Taliban, whether you agree or disagree with what they do in Afghanistan, they weren't our primary enemy in the 1980s. They weren't enemies at all. And outside of that, most of Reagan's stuff that he dealt with was actually in northern Africa, as well as obviously he had the Grenada incident where he sent troops in to save American students that were there in Grenada. But regardless, I don't think you can actually blame any piece of the Middle East on Reagan for the most part. You know, you could point to George H., George W., you can point to Carter, you could point to Clinton. I don't see how the Reagan Doctrine made things worse in the Middle East. If somebody could maybe post on the Facebook and counter, but I just don't see it as a issue.
Either do I. And if anything, right, I would add on to what you just stated is that when Reagan took office, right, he was joining, he took over an already, intense situation throughout the world, right? And we'd already mentioned some of them, going back to Vietnam, Cambodia, the Middle East, dealing with Russia with certain treaties and so forth, right? And not backing down. And so when you want to talk then about the Middle East and them going into certain other countries, so Afghanistan and so forth, that he didn't do anything to worsen that. If anything, he rebuilt up the military to go in there to assist the countries that were being attacked from a social communist regime.
Yeah, you're dead on right. Actually, prior to so Reagan, oftentimes is faulted for leaving with a slight deficit, which liberals should never open their mouth about a deficit. when Barack Obama left office with $19 trillion in debt. So
Right.
I don't want to hear any liberal ever talk about a deficit.
To be fair, I'll just say that he gave us an additional 10 trillion.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. leave it at that. Right. 787 billion off the bat for first big piece of legislation.
Yeah. I just don't want somebody's going to jump on there and say, well, hold on now. You saying he didn't take over any debt already? So I'm just making sure that we don't get criticized.
No, of course. I mean, one dude spent the same amount that the other 43 presidents did.
Correct.
Okay, sure. I guess I buy that. But the big thing is Carter, and actually even prior to Carter, Ford and Nixon actually did a really poor job of advancing military weaponry, actually. So so you actually have Nixon using treaties to water down our nuclear arsenal and capability. You have Ford, who never really passed any major piece of legislation, and then you have Carter, who completely ignored most military advancements, not spending on military, right? So at that time, we were slightly outmatched by the Soviets in certain aspects, not all, but certain aspects. And the Soviets had just updated a huge amount of their arsenal, not to be superior, but they just had a lot more missiles than we did that had nuclear capability. And under Reagan, you actually see a massive spending on updating our nuclear capability, which barely today is now getting updated from the Reagan years. Reagan also signed into creation the B-2. He also signed into creation the F-15, the F-18, and there's another aircraft. I can't remember which one.
Yeah, he brought our military power to might.
Yeah,
he brought it back from it being corrupt to not having any influence to it being one of the strongest, if not the strongest military at the time, so that we actually had the military backing to go say yes and or no to certain other countries to say, don't fucking think so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think people don't realize the fact that we were completely out of date, and by the time he left office, he left a pretty nice fleet for George H. and Clinton to have.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. We're still using most of the aircraft that he signed into law today.
Right. All right. Let's get into number one here then. Reagan's mental health reforms made homelessness and crime exponentially worse.
So this is definitely true. Unfortunately, I would say the biggest blemish on the Reagan legacy is probably the mental health aspect. And what it is when it came to government spending cutting spending, he unfortunately.
Sorry.
Yeah, he unfortunately he did cut a lot of these industries that focused on mental health. Now, with that said, it's not that he completely ignored mental health, but PTSD was something that we didn't really understand in the 1980s. We were barely coming to terms that there may be some sort of issue when people leave war, for instance,
right? And
or when people have gone through something traumatic. We knew there was something, but it wasn't developed like it is today. So it's easy for crack.com to use a modern lens to judge Reagan having to make cuts and whatnot here and there. But for the most part, I think at the time he thought this would be an acceptable cut. And looking back at it, a lot of veterans were impacted by it. So that is sort of the shitty part. But it's definitely not intentional by any means. And it's one of those things where it's we can use hindsight to judge it. But I think at the time, if you were sitting there, you would have been okay with the cut.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. That was obviously a very good rebuttal discussion. Debate over the cracked website of the 6 things where Ronald Reagan, has quote unquote destroyed us, and you only gave him the 1 out of the 6, right? Which was the mental illness one. Now, briefly before then, we kind of wrap this up about Ronald Reagan's, I'll say failures or successes, and obviously we use that website to basically kind of capture them both.
Yeah, of course.
With what they said based off then what your rebuttals. And again, you can go to that website. That was www.cracked.com, CRACKED, and you can search the article. So 6 ways Reagan destroyed us. But what I would argue, so I'm going to make kind of my last point on two lasting legacies that Ronald Reagan did, and then you can say what you want to them, and then also add your kind of final thought.
Sure.
And then we'll go ahead and wrap everything up. So there are. Let me back up a little bit. Would you agree that just because you can speed down the road, should you or should you not? If you were to get caught Right. Do you think the law should still apply to you?
Of course, you made the choice.
Okay.
You have to take responsibility for the choice you made.
Okay. So where I'm going with that is there are 730 some, give or take, federal appointed judges, correct?
Yeah, there's
right
a lot.
around
There's
that
a
number.
lot, yeah.
Quite a few. During Reagan's term, he appointed around like 350 or so.
Yeah, I think three Supreme Court justices
during
too.
his and 3 Supreme Court justices during his, and that's both terms, both 4-year terms. And I would also like to add that he was healthy throughout both of those full 2 terms, as opposed to some of the previous presidents who started getting iller towards the end of their time.
I mean, he did get shot.
Oh, true. If anything, I would only say that made him want to revitalize him and said, "Oh, now I know what the fuck to do." Besides the point. So I said ill, not injured.
Yeah,
But
I see. There's a difference. I see it.
So, mind you, 3 Supreme Court justices, all right, 350 some odd federal judges that he appointed right during his term, of the approximately 730 that are available, of individuals that not only were young. That way, they are some a majority of them are still around even right now.
Oh yeah, we just had one. We just had one of them die off the Supreme Court last year.
Yep, who he appointed were individuals that would actually rule the way the court of law is supposed to, work. Right? Is interpret and base off exactly what the words say. You have Congress that should, and this applies to obviously your city. State, right, or federal level, but Congress makes the laws, the president, quote unquote, enforces them, or the police, and the courts interpret, right, if there is a dispute. They don't make the damn law.
Correct.
But what was happening during that time when Reagan took office was that you had a lot of judges, right, and a lot of influence that was going in of making law or not interpreting it the way that it was meant to be interpreted.
Yeah, living constitutionalists.
Correct. So that's one thing that I would like to sit here and say that, of course, I would be for, is right, is that this all goes back to the separation of powers. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a very great lasting legacy that he has done. The second one that I would bring up to you, which may be the most important one, was he was instrumental in starting the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Star Wars. Yeah, I don't get the reference, but
That's what they call. That's what he called the SDI when he presented it, like to the public. He called it the Star Wars.
oh, okay.
And to be honest with you, the purpose of Star Wars was to bankrupt the Soviet Union. He knew the Soviets would try to outspend him and they would collapse. It's genius. I'll tell you about it after.
All right, great. So, anywho, the Strategic Defense Initiative, right, was in regards to reducing, of course, nuclear arms and so forth. And he was instrumental in that. And a lot of that had to do was going back to us having the military might to say, no, we're not going to succumb to what you would like us to do, country, insert name here. We will go ahead and do what we want to do and remain a superpower. And when we take away, if we all were to take away the weapons of mass destruction, America is still the superpower. And that's what his kind of point was the only reason why you are where you are, country, insert your name here besides the United States of America, is because you have them. Otherwise, you're nobody on this world stage. And so where I'm going with that is, yes, are there still obviously weapons of mass destruction? Yes. Is there a big problem going on in North Korea? Yes, there is, along with many other places. But at least we have reduced it significantly. We're trying to get rid of them. And it was all because of him. So for those individuals out there, right, that do not want nuclear war, you can thank obviously then Ronald Reagan for starting it and giving it one of the biggest pushes that he possibly could. Which is still going on today with, again, like the START Treaty, which is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and
SALT.
And there's also SALT. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
START. Yeah.
No, I completely. Yeah, no, I'm completely tracking.
So that's what I wanted, just to say what I thought two of his great legacies were. Look, I obviously think like the Reaganomics and so forth that we went into are good as well, blah blah blah. But I just wanted to give my two. And now, Rich, I will let you go ahead and give any lasting legacies that you think as well before we wrap it up. And I also, in case, just to reiterate, if this is the time that you want to talk about realigning the government, right, the federalist stuff.
Yeah,
That you mentioned.
So I'll talk about the realignment after. I actually completely agree with you. So
why wouldn't you?
Exactly. So under Reagan, you're right. Reagan's most important, like basically when he stepped into office, he said, "Look, I'm willing to be flexible." Right? I ran on a certain platform. I'm willing to be flexible, but there were three keys that he would not budge on. His number one goal is when he left office, he would shrink down the size of the bureaucracy in government. He'd shrink down the overall size of government. He wanted to reflourish the economy, and the last thing he wanted to do is he wanted to project military strength and reestablish relationships that had been ruined with allies under the Carter and Nixon and Ford administrations. So I feel like he did those things, and you're absolutely right. He went ahead and he put up Justice Kennedy, who I'm not a huge fan of, right? But that's neither here nor there. He put up Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female to ever be on the Supreme Court, conservative, and then he also put up Antonin Scalia, who is like probably the most profound originalist that we've ever had on the court, right? Yeah. Or textualist, one could argue the term textualist. But regardless, he put these people up because you're right. You have from the late 1930s until the 1980s, you have living constitutional doctrine basically creating legislation from the bench, right? Because they're saying, hey, there's no way we could ever know what the founders wanted, so we have to interpret things for this time, right? That's a living constitutional doctrine.
Correct.
And what ends up happening is you have liberal activism that started underneath that. Most of those judges are FDR judges, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt judges. And then later on, unfortunately, Eisenhower actually put Warren on the bench as well, and he ended up being an asshole. But under Reagan, you end up having the return of originalism, which is, hey, we do know how to interpret the Constitution because we have the Constitution, we have the Federalist Papers, we have the Continental Congress and the Congressional Congress, and lastly, we have the Declaration of Independence. And if a law doesn't fit within the confines of any of those documents, then it probably wasn't the interpretation of the founders. And I think originalism normally leads to small government, and that's what Reagan's goal was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Number two, you're absolutely right. The SDI was essential, and one thing I'd like to highlight is a lot of the treaties that initially were to reduce arms were actually initially started under Nixon, right? So Nixon had SALT 1 and 2, and then later treaties were signed under both Carter and Reagan. But what Reagan did that separated him from everybody else was he started SDI, and SDI is still going on today. We call it the THUD program now, right? And the idea is that anybody can have nukes, but we're the only ones that can actually knock them out of the sky. And it flattens the field because when it comes down to it, you can have MAD, but if the United States can knock out
mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, but if we can knock nuclear missiles out of the sky, it levels the playing field against the Soviets, you know?
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? So what ends up happening is Reagan actually presents what's called the Star Wars, the SDI, and it was literally drawn up by his scientists that worked for his administration, basically saying that we were going to launch satellites in the air, and based on their orbits, they would be able to either send missiles or lasers to intercept and blow up nukes before they could touch down. So he called it the Star Wars. I would argue most documents show that he knew we would never actually have missile systems in space to knock this stuff down. But damn it, we had already been to the moon. We had already succeeded in so many other things that it was enough. It was a big enough bluff to make the Soviet Union pump God knows amounts of money into their defense.
Oh yeah,
you know. So you end up having the Soviets at the end of their run, spending about 70% of their GDP, 70% of their revenue collected from taxes on their defense. And any nation that's going to spend even 50% or more is not going to be able to survive. And so it basically assured the destruction of the Soviet Union. I guess my final point for Reagan is I kept talking about realignment, and I think it's so important, and I don't think most citizens understand it, and they shouldn't, because like if you don't study politics for the long term, you would never see it this way. But you have to understand America had always been sort of center right compared to the rest of the world. And then you have in 1912, you have the election of Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is the first progressive president to push what we would call a socialist state or a welfare state. And his theory was that if he expanded government and he expanded governmental rights granted by government instead of God, that people would become dependent on the government, so he could push more socialist reforms and ideology. And then after he gets out of office, it's not that much farther down the line that we have the Great Depression and FDR comes into office. And FDR gets 4 terms of passing the New Deal legislation, which is an expansion on Woodrow Wilson's executive expansion already, right? And he uses New Deal to basically triple the size of government. And he basically clouds it in the idea that this is a new constitution, this is a new Bill of Rights being granted to you by the government instead of God. And people go for it because you're in dire straits during the Great Depression, and someone's trying to, reach their hand out, and they're telling you that, hey, this is something you deserve.
Right.
So people bought into it. And then really the third wave of progressivism really finishes off with LBJ. Great Society is the final expansion of, the final as I'm saying this, Thomas is waving his empty glass of wine, showing me that, hey, I need to reload. Under LBJ, you see a massive expansion of government spending and government size, taking the New Deal and saying, hey, we're going to give you all this other free shit, so you become more dependent on the government. So America, in the course of a 40 to 50-year span, shifted from being a center-right nation to being a far-left nation without the people really knowing it. And that's why taxation was at a 60, 70, 80 percentile in America in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And most people don't realize it actually put a stranglehold on the government. And we see that happen when Carter gets into office, because they have huge debt at government level because they can't support the expenditures. The economy's not getting the taxation they used to. They can't support it. And Vietnam dragged out longer than liberals thought. So what Reagan does is he realigns America. He never gets us back to being center-right the way we used to be, but he definitely brings us back to the center more towards a conservative base. And what he does is he knocks down every Great Society piece of legislation that was hurting us at the time. Unfortunately, there was a lot of damage done by Great Society, and it targeted minorities. Minorities think Great Society helped them out because it gave them welfare, and it provided women and whatnot, like aid when they needed it. But what they don't realize is before Great Society, there were a lot more blacks and Mexicans being born during marriage, and they weren't a part of the poverty. They weren't as far below the poverty line as they are today.
Right. Now,
roughly around 72% of blacks are actually born outside of marriage. Right, and they're being told that they don't need to be married. God knows how many babies are being killed through abortion by black families, and what I'm getting at is Great Society, to me, is actually a form of societal racism. It's definitely it's a form of racism that the government allows, and people just don't realize it. So, anyways, the point being is Reagan takes these New Deal, Great Society legislations, and he knocks down as much as he can while he's in. He's just knocking them down, repealing, passing new legislation, cutting taxes.
Right.
Right. And the beauty of what Reagan did is he brought back not only limited government, but he brought back the idea that you should take as much of the money that you earn home. It should not go to the government. If you work for it, it is your money. You should determine where it goes.
Every last penny.
And his goal was he wanted to privatize Social Security. There's a great speech by him if you're listening, right? Just YouTube it. It's called Now is the Time. And it's a 1968 speech or 64 speech that he gives. I think it's 1968. He gives a speech to young Republicans where he basically explains Social Security during our time period today is not going to be around. And really what he's aiming at is that our age group will not receive it, right?
Right.
And he was dead on. And he was saying, he's like, you could take the money that you're giving to the government for Social Security, you can invest it privately, and you're going to have 2 to 3 times the amount of money if you just went through private industry to invest that money, right? And he was saying, he's like, if I owned a farm, I wouldn't take the government's subsidies. Instead, I would keep the complete rights to my farm to sell and grow what I want. And so my point being is he brought back the idea of America that our framers left us with. And I don't think people appreciate that enough today. And you're seeing that really with Trump today, too. You see Brock try to realign back under the FDR, LBJ progressive movement, and Trump is doing everything that he can to remove that legacy, remove what is going to shift us left.
Yeah. Again, very well put. You know, I would make one comment in regards to the abortion thing,
Sure.
right, about it, is that what statistics have shown is that when abortion became legal, roughly 14 to 20 years later, a lot of crime went down.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother topic. I'm not
It
really,
is.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the idea of I think it's almost like governmental racism in a way, because who's using the abortions more? Is it white families or is it blacks?
I concur with you.
And so it sort of disturbs me that
I don't know. I mean, maybe whites might be using it more. I mean, I see a lot of black families that end up having multiple kids just to collect another check for a kid.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're talking about the welfare state.
Yeah, I was kind of making a little fun. It was a joke.
Anyways, that wasn't my point. Wasn't to talk about abortion by any means. I'm simply saying that there's a huge issue that comes from the Great Society, and I think Reagan knew there's no way our nation would be able to handle that kind of expenditure.
Yeah, fair point. All right, look, we just got done then discussing Ronald Reagan's presidency a little bit, some of his successes, what people have thought have been failures. Rich went ahead and countered them. He's our resident Viper, very important podcaster, amazing guy, my co-host. So if you want to, again, leave us a comment, leave us a review, you want to find us, you want to start listening to us over the actual internet and not use the Podbean website where it says www.viewsandfacts.com, then you can go to YouTube, just search Views and Facts or search the name of any title of any of the episodes, and then you can just subscribe to the channel. At Views and Facts for Facebook and Twitter. And a shameless little plug here, because I'm a gun owner. If you do not own a slide fire stock, now,
Also known as a bump fire.
Also known as, yes, the quote-unquote bump fire stock, right? That was just recently used, apparently, right, in one of the, in the worst mass shooting, whatever. Look, I'm telling you, they could be on the verge of being, right, like grandfathered into where if you own one, you'll be good. If not, you're screwed. So their website then, slidefire.com, right? They have just done the second limited release because they are going just right. They're running out of manufacturing, right? I mean, they're selling out every time. So they're doing these limited releases. So if you want one of these, they run roughly in between, depending on what model you want, $150 to $200. You better get on there, throw your email address down to be notified when they're gonna do one, and pick one up. Look, back when they first came out, I spent $340 on mine. All right, so you're getting a damn deal. You can buy two of them basically for the price that I paid for one. Look, shameless plug here. We've been meaning to do an episode about guns.
Yeah, we definitely need to.
But because of all the shit keeps happening back to back to back, it just keeps changing the narrative.
It'd also be nice if our viewers told us if they even wanted to hear it. You know what I mean?
True, and I think a few of them have. But at least definitely for me, one of the reasons why I've been holding back is that when I start to go down that thread of research, something else happens, and so then it's like, well, now let's see where this goes, because I don't want to talk about something if the news is just going to counteract me or legislation. So, but anywho, shameless plug, slidefire.com. Get your fucking stock. They're amazing. They are phenomenal. Great piece of equipment. So anyways, find us at Views and Facts. Look, I was Thomas John. Rich, any last words?
Yeah, actually, don't forget Veterans Day is the 11th of November, and I think it's being observed in America for the most part on the 10th, right, which is Friday. Or is it still the 11th because it's a Saturday? People are observing it that day.
Well, so yes, I mean it's still okay. I guess you would argue it is still celebrated on the 11th. It's probably quote unquote observed on the 10th.
Yep.
Right, if that makes sense for people being able to get out and whatnot.
So make sure if you guys are out there listening, thank vets. Don't just thank them for their efforts in warfare and their service to the nation, but seriously thank them for their time that they lose because, when they're deployed, when they're at work, they don't actually get to, they don't always get Thanksgiving. They don't always get Christmas. I've met many members that have missed, graduations or birthdays for their children. So just make sure you thank them for that. And then if you're in the local area, and if you find yourself in Rockland, California by any means, me and my fiance, Simone Granado, will actually be hosting a flag ceremony at William Jessup University. I'll be introducing her. She's the keynote speaker, and that's at 7:30 in front of the flagpole Friday. So come honor the vets.
PM?
AM.
7:30 a.m.?
Yep, 07:30. We have the honor guard coming out to raise the flag and do the whole ceremony, so by 8 o'clock the flag's hoisted.
All right.
Got to do it the right way.
Okay. Well, look, this gets released at 1 a.m. People know that. We'll drop it on Facebook, too. Or maybe you can drop it on Facebook. Then people know, hey, you want to come out and support? Boom, 7:30. You can drop it on there. So that was it?
That was all.
All right. So, again, find us at Views and Facts. I was Thomas John. I've got Viper Rich in here. Tell your friends. Leave a comment. Leave a review. And we appreciate you listening. Take care.